This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a doctor or registered nutritionist, and I do not provide medical advice. You are advised to do your own research and make decisions in partnership with your healthcare provider. If you're pregnant, nursing, have a medical condition, or are taking any medication, please consult your physician and do not go off any medication without consulting with your healthcare provider. Nothing in this podcast should be relied upon to determine dietary changes, a medical diagnosis, or course of treatment. Welcome to the Slightly Greener Life podcast. This is your host, Tanya Harris. I am an award-winning environmental toxin expert, best-selling author, and mother of three. I created this podcast as a place to help busy moms ditch the overwhelm and start living a low-toxin life. Now, let's get into this week's episode. Welcome to another episode of the Slightly Greener Life. And I am so excited you're here because I cannot wait to dig into this topic. Although honestly, I feel like I can really say that every week. But really, this episode is close to my heart because it has to do with my kids. And it's really what got me started on this journey that I've been on for the past 17 years, which is really crazy to think about that I've been doing that this long. I started when my son was 8 and he's 25 now, so that's even crazier to me. But I really love talking about children's health when it comes to toxins because children are more susceptible to the health effects of toxins, which I think is a topic that needs to be talked more about. Their detoxification pathways are not as developed as in adults, meaning that they can't detoxify and flush out the toxins as quickly as an adult can, which leaves the toxins a longer time in the body to do the harm. Plus, they're also exposed earlier in life and they have a longer lifespan in front of them. So there's so many chemicals now that haven't been out like when we were little, and so many more are coming on the market, and we just don't know what these chemicals do or how they act synergistically. There's just so many unknowns. When I started putting this podcast episode together, I was going to do it purely on artificial colors and the link to hyperactivity, but I realized there's a lot more to it than that, and there's so much information out there that goes beyond hyperactivity, and it's not just the kids and behavior that these artificial colors can affect. It's adults also, and they can affect us in so many different surprising ways. So for this episode, I'll go into some of those surprising health effects that studies are showing, and then I'll go into solutions. And it's kind of a tricky topic because artificial colors or artificial food dyes, as you'll also hear them called, used to be very easy to find on the label. You would typically see red number 40 or its abbreviated name, red 40. And then sometimes you'll also see them labeled with FD and C or Lake in front of the color name. But now, sometimes they're listed by other names, which are kind of their common names, such as Allura Red AC, which is another name for red 40, or tartrazine, which is another name for yellow number 5. So you really just have to know what to be on the lookout for. Artificial colors are food dyes that are derived from petroleum that are used to enhance the color of processed foods. And the reason they're used is because they're cheaper, they're more readily available, and they last longer than natural colorings, which are usually unable to achieve the same bright hues. And they're also used to make foods look more appealing, but they don't offer any nutritional value. And the amount of synthetic food colorings has increased in the last 50 years by about 500%. And many allergic and immune-related issues have increased during that time period. Artificial colors are found in many processed foods, such as soda and other beverages. They can be found in salad dressings and snack foods and chips, brightly colored candy, and even in things like toothpaste, mouthwash, vitamins, and medicines, such as cough syrups. So they're in a lot of different things. They can be in other types of personal care products too. It's just, you really have to know what to be on the lookout for because it is surprising where they can be lurking. So although there are several of these certified synthetic dyes that are approved for use by the FDA, red number 40, yellow number 5, and yellow number 6 account for the 90% that are used in foods. But one of the big problems with these is that these three also contain benzoate, which is a known human and animal carcinogen, meaning that this substance is known to cause cancer in humans and animals. And one of the biggest problems is that we're getting multiple exposures to these colorings, most likely several times a day, because as you saw, they are in so many different products. So even though the level may be considered to be safe in food, we're likely to be getting several different exposures of it through our foods, personal care products, and possibly even our medications. So the other colorings that are approved for use are yellow number 6, red number 3 and blue number 1, just to name a couple. I think those are the other most used ones. And I have a list that you can get on my website. It'll be a downloadable cheat sheet. So you don't have to remember all these names, but I also have where you can find them. And I'm looking at the list right now, and it's in really surprising things like even pickles or maraschino cherries or frosting. There's just so many places where these can be hiding. And I'm looking at the list right now, and it's also in things like mustard and fish. There's so many different places. So that's why it's so important to learn what to be on the lookout for and label. And it's even in some of these unexpected places, like who would think pickles would have artificial colors? And then another problem is that many of the foods in Europe have different formulations than they do here in the US. And many of these food colorings have been removed from foods in Europe. Or if they have them, they must carry a warning label. So for example, I have a photo of Kraft macaroni and cheese that I will also post on my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 14, that yellow number 5 and yellow number 6, which you'll see labeled as tartrazine and sunset yellow, which are their other names. And the label specifically says on there that this product may have adverse effects on activity and attention in children. So you'll see a warning label like that over in Europe, but you won't see that here in the United States, or at least at the time of this podcast. It's not like a big thing right now, but I'll put this photo again on my website so that you can see this, and including a list of all these artificial colors and the other names they go by. So don't worry about writing these down or memorizing them right now. But before we get into some of the other health concerns of artificial colors, I realized that there is a lot of conflicting information out there about whether or not these colorings do affect things like hyperactivity. But I've looked at enough studies to see that there are more and more research findings that are coming out to support that they do affect things like hyperactivity and behavior problems. And I always like to err on the side of caution. And because artificial food dyes are found mainly in processed foods that are unhealthy anyway, it really doesn't hurt to avoid them. Plus, I saw the evidence in my own family with my son back in 2006. So you may have heard me talk about this before, but he was having attention problems back in 2nd grade. The teacher called me in to talk about some of these issues that she had been seeing. And there was just something in me, because I had seen the attention issues at home. I knew it was a problem, but something in my head just said, I wonder if it's something in our house or our diet that could be contributing to these symptoms. And I think a lot of that goes back to my being a childhood cancer survivor and growing up being told, be careful what you eat. So I went home back in 2006, did some online research, which wasn't so easy back then, and read some books. And I'm a really fast reader. So I did a lot of this in a short amount of time because I soaked up all the information. And what I found was there were 2 ingredients, which are artificial colors and sodium benzoate or benzoate preservatives, that can lead to hyperactivity, as you'll see soon with a couple of these studies that I'm going to talk about. But I removed them from my son's diet, and I went back to have the follow-up meeting with his teacher a couple weeks later, and the school no longer saw a need to test him, which I was floored. I was super happy, and I was hooked on a more natural approach. Now, if that wasn't the case, we would have gone down the medication route. We would have done whatever we needed to do, but we were able to lessen the symptoms enough at the time so that we could avoid that and just kind of remove some of these ingredients from his diet. So we didn't cure him, but we did lessen the symptoms enough. So I want to make that clear. But it's just very cool to see that there was that connection. And once we removed those, some of the, especially probably the fidgeting is what I noticed went away a little bit more. So kind of cool. So I really definitely saw this with my own family. And another thing that I learned too when I was researching this a little bit more was that a lot of the research on artificial food colorings are outdated. So a 2021 report released by the California Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment found that the consumption of synthetic food dyes can have negative effects on the neurobehavioral health of children. And these dyes have been associated with hyperactivity and other neurobehavioral issues in some children, but the individual sensitivity to these dyes may vary. And the current federal levels for safe intake of these synthetic food dyes, which were established by the US FDA, are based on outdated research. And some of this research is 35 to 70-year-old studies that they're basing this off of. And that may not provide sufficient protection for children's behavioral health, according to this report. So the levels were based on outdated research, and they do not reflect newer research findings. So although these artificial colors are approved by the FDA, most of the research is decades old. And in general, studies conducted on humans show a connection between synthetic food dyes and negative neurobehavioral effects in children, again, with variations in individual sensitivity to these dyes. And this was a scary fact that I read. But animal studies indicate that synthetic food dyes, or artificial colors, you might also hear them called, I'm kind of interchanging them here, can impact activity levels, memory, and learning. They also have the potential to induce changes in neurotransmitters, which are chemicals responsible for transmitting signals between nerves, and they can even cause microscopic alterations in brain structure. And this report also went on to say that the percentage of American children and adolescents diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, has increased from an estimated 6.1 to 10.2% during the last 20 years. So with the concerns about increasing rates of ADHD, which increased again 6.1% to 10.2%, as well as other behavioral disorders, prompted the food dye assessment report that I'm talking about right now. And the director of the agency that provided this report stated that this report's assessment can help protect children from exposures that may make behavioral problems worse. So it was exciting to me that they are looking for ways, especially through the diet, that could protect children from things that may make their behavioral or their attention issues worse. And then researchers of a study published in the journal Neurotherapeutics stated that there is a small but significant harmful effect of artificial colors on children's behavior that is not confined to those with diagnosable ADHD. The researchers stated that artificial colors are not necessarily a major cause of ADHD, but they do seem to affect children regardless, whether or not they have it. So I have a couple studies here that I'll talk about real quick. I'll link a couple other ones, but I think these are the two major ones that really show the effect of artificial colors on hyperactivity. And the first one is from the Archives of Diseases in Childhood. And the aim of this study was to investigate whether artificial food colorings and a preservative in the diet of 3-year-old children have an impact on their behavior. So the children were put on a diet that excluded artificial colors and benzoate preservatives for 1 week. And then that was followed by a 3-week double-blind crossover study, which that's where the children were given either a drink containing artificial colors and sodium benzoate or a placebo added to their regular diet. And that was done in a random order. But the results showed that there was a significant reduction in hyperactive behavior during the period when the artificial colorings and preservatives were eliminated. And parents reported significantly higher levels of hyperactive behavior during the active period when the children consumed those artificial colorings and benzoate preservative. So that's pretty similar to what they found in a British study in 2007 that was published in The Lancet, which found a link between sodium benzoate and artificial colors and increased hyperactivity in children. And I think this is another great example of the different attention and behavior effects they saw once they took these two things out of the diet or when they added them in. So again, these two things are artificial colors and sodium benzoate, which were actually the two things I took out of my son's diet. So what they did was they took 300 children in 2 different age groups. They took 3-year-olds and 8 and 9-year-olds. And over 3 one-week time periods, the children were randomly assigned to consume 1 of 3 fruit drinks daily. One contained the amount of dye and sodium benzoate that's typically found in a British child's diet. A second drink had lower concentrations of the additives. And the third drink was additive-free. And all of the children spent a week drinking each of the 3 mixtures, which all looked and tasted alike, so nobody could tell the difference. And during each week-long period, teachers and parents used a variety of standardized behavior evaluation tools, and they didn't know which drinks the kids were getting. But the results, I think, are super interesting because they showed a modest increase in hyperactivity, even among children who have never been diagnosed with ADHD. So it's affecting them either way. And the observations from both teachers and parents noticed qualities like restlessness, they had concentration issues, fidgeting, and they were talking or interrupting too much. So the lead researcher of the study stated that while the effects were not enough to cause full-blown ADHD, he said, quote, the adverse effects could affect the child's ability to benefit from the experience of school. So really, this study showed a modest increase in hyperactivity, even among the children who have never been diagnosed with a behavioral problem or an attention issue. There are more studies that I have here, but I'm not going to read them because I feel like it's getting a little boring if I read these studies. But I just want to demonstrate the effects that these artificial colors can have on hyperactivity, even though some people say it doesn't affect hyperactivity or behavior. But we can see here that there definitely are some links. So I'll put a couple more of those studies if you're interested. I'll put them on my website. But you can see here that there are a lot of research findings that support artificial colors and their effect on hyperactivity, and that the safe levels that are currently determined by the FDA are based on research findings that are decades old and don't necessarily take into account newer findings. There are a few other health effects that are being linked to artificial colors too that I think are worth mentioning, but food is probably the main way we think of getting exposure to artificial colors, but they can also be absorbed through the skin in personal care products and certain pharmaceutical products. So these synthetic food dyes can bond to food or body proteins, which allows them to potentially bypass and disrupt the immune system. So the consumption of artificial colors and their ability to bind to food or body proteins can have serious immunological effects, such as triggering inflammatory responses or inducing increased intestinal permeability, so leaky gut, if you've heard of that term, and potentially leading to cross reactions, autoimmunities or autoimmune disorders, and neurobehavioral disorders. So it can even affect our immune system, which can lead to a cascade of other things. And 4 of these dyes, which are blue 1, red 40, yellow 5, and yellow 6, have been found to cause hypersensitivity reactions in studies. And various studies and rodent studies of yellow 5 were positive for genotoxicity. And that means that they can cause damage to DNA or to the chromosomes, which then has the potential to cause cancer and genetic mutations or genetic disorders. And then a 2022 study found that long-term ingestion of Allura Red, which is red number 40, food coloring over an extended period of time can potentially act as a trigger for inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And animal studies of inflammatory bowel diseases discovered that prolonged exposure to Allura Red AC, which again is red number 40, adversely affects gut health and encourages inflammation. So that's a newer finding that is just recently coming out, which is kind of alarming. And yellow number 5 is known to cause allergic reactions such as asthma and urticaria, which are more commonly known as hives. And I have an example from my own family when I think about yellow number 5. And this was a long time ago when my son was in 6th grade or maybe it was 8th grade. I don't know. It was sometime in junior high, but he was wrestling and that was very important to him. And he went outside in the garage and he had grabbed a yellow popsicle, which, if you know me, I'm not a fan, especially when you listen to this podcast episode. But my husband occasionally buys those popsicles that are full on artificial colors, which, as you can imagine, I am totally not a fan of. But anyway, Eric went out and he grabbed this popsicle and I just kind of looked at him, and I've learned that the best way to talk to your kids is talk with them and let them know why you're making the choices you are, and to not necessarily tell them no outright, but have them feel like they have a say in the matter. So I just kind of looked at him and I said, "Don't you have a wrestling meet tomorrow?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I just want you to know that popsicle contains yellow number 5 and yellow number 6, and yellow number 5 is known to worsen asthma symptoms. So if you're at practice tonight and then you have your meet tomorrow and your asthma's kicking in, that this might be a problem. So even if you didn't have an asthma episode, it could still worsen some of your symptoms and you might not be able to do as well." And I will never forget that he looked at the popsicle and then just threw it away. And I was trying to act not shocked because my mouth dropped to the floor like, oh my gosh, that worked. But it's just really cool the decisions our kids can make, or even ourselves, when we have a reason behind why we're trying to avoid some of these chemicals. So I just thought that was really cool. So I thought I'd share that story real quick. So that's really it for what I have for this episode, because I could go on and on, but I'll link to some more studies in my show notes on the website. But just a quick review, because we did go over a lot. Artificial colors are petroleum-based dyes that are used to brighten foods and provide uniform color, but they offer no nutritional value. And the top 3 most used food colorings, which are red number 40, yellow number 5, and yellow number 6, contain benzoate, which is a human and animal carcinogen, meaning that they are known to cause cancer. And many of the food dyes approved for use in the U.S. have been removed from products in Europe, but foods that do contain them must carry a warning label. And studies have demonstrated a link between food dyes and hyperactivity, as well as conditions like asthma, allergic reactions, behavior problems, inflammatory bowel diseases, and immune system problems, among other health effects. And artificial colors are sometimes listed by other names, such as tartrazine for yellow number 5. So it's really important to educate yourself on food labels, which I am here to help you do. And again, I will have a downloadable cheat sheet at slightlygreener.com/episode 14, so you can see all of these names and where they're found. And I'll also have a list of solutions there too, because the good thing is there are a lot of solutions and simple things that you can do to avoid these artificial colors. So here are some simple ways to avoid them and what to look for instead. But the first thing to do is read labels carefully because unfortunately, it's not uncommon to see several artificial food colorings in one product. So things you can do are avoid anything brightly colored because if they're naturally colored, which I'll talk about in a minute what to look for, they're usually more muted. So if you see something brightly colored, it's probably artificial colors. So avoid foods and beverages that contain colors followed by a number. And of course, check the cheat sheet because not all of them are like that anymore. Another thing you can do is eat and cook with whole foods as much as possible while limiting packaged and processed foods. And I know that's easier said than done sometimes. And also, if you need a food coloring for baking, use a naturally derived food coloring. And I think the brand I like is Supernatural. So I'll link to that in the show notes also. As far as what to look for alternatives to these artificial colors, there's colorings out there that are more natural. And something you want to look for are things like turmeric, red beets or red beet powder, beta carotene, paprika extract, blackcurrant extract, and saffron. And they will say added for color. So you don't have to worry about why are these ingredients in here. And they are more natural colorings that haven't been found to lead to hyperactive effects. So these would be a better option. So when you're making the transition to healthier whole foods, it's easier and easier to find naturally colored cereals, snack foods, and candy. And while they are not necessarily the healthiest foods, and candy will always still be candy and full of sugar, they are a great way to transition foods and to be used as an occasional treat or dessert so your child, or you even, don't feel deprived. And for a list of foods that don't have artificial colors, or at least they didn't at the time of printing, I have a list of foods and beverages in my book that are colored with natural colors. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So that book is called The Slightly Greener Method. And I'll put a link there too, because it's got a lot of resources in there. I think there's over 100 different resources of safer brands. So as you can see, artificial colors may be able to affect our health in many different ways. And just like with many toxic chemicals, you may or may not feel the effects. But I do believe that these chemicals are worth avoiding for just about everyone, but especially for children. And because of our family's history with attention problems and learning disabilities and seeing the results from my own children, I feel that this is really a simple way to help lessen the symptoms. And with artificial colors being in so many processed junk foods, it's really just a win-win to avoid them overall. So that's it for this episode. I'll be working on the next one, which will be kind of a continuation of this because I'll be talking about healthy food and snack ideas for kids to help keep attention and behavior issues at bay, especially since now they'll be eating at home a majority of the time because they're home for the summer. And artificial colors are really just one part of the puzzle, but there are a couple more things that we can do for ourselves and our kids that will have us eating healthier and that will also help protect our brain health. So if you'd like to discuss this episode with other listeners and get ideas and tips for reducing toxins in your home, I would love for you to join my free Facebook group, The Slightly Greener Community. And I'll put a link to that as well as the downloadable cheat sheet and all the good stuff I've talked about on my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 14. See you next week. Are you tired of trying to figure out which ingredients are safe and which products are truly safer? The Slightly Greener membership is here to help you eliminate any guesswork. With an easy step-by-step process and a supportive community, you'll learn how to transition into a low-toxic lifestyle with just a few small changes at a time. This membership will provide you with the knowledge, tools, and support you need to keep your home looking and feeling healthy without turning your lifestyle upside down. You'll learn which ingredients to avoid and which brands are truly safer so that your search for safe products becomes easy and automatic. Imagine being able to make simple swaps that significantly reduce toxins in your home without sacrificing convenience or comfort. No more hours of researching trying to find safe products and no more guessing. I'll take the guesswork and hours of research off your plate, leaving you with more time to enjoy living a low-toxin lifestyle. Join the membership today and be free of worrying if your products may contain hidden toxic chemicals or worse, greenwashed formulas that are marketed as all natural or eco-friendly that turn out to be anything but. So empower yourself with this knowledge so that you can keep your family safe while saving money, time, and your sanity. Find out more at slightlygreener.com/membership. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Slightly Greener Life podcast. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show. And then be sure to share it with a friend who you know wants simple steps to living in this complex world. I'll see you next time.